Hey guys, we're going to continue on our study in Matthew 5, and the next one that we get to is verse 8. And we were going through before, and we were doing the Beatitudes, and we were seeing how each one kind of built on another to show kind of a chronological progression of sanctification within the life of a Christian. And we look at verse 8, and it says, "Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God." And kind of we look at this on the surface, and it means what it says, are the pure in heart. But as we get later on in the chapter, you can see in verse 20, Jesus is kind of expounding on this thought a little bit, and he says, "For I say unto you, that except that your righteousness exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees, ye shall in no case enter the kingdom of God," or the kingdom of heaven. And one of the things that we can see from this is that the scribes and the Pharisees were known for their religious observance. They were known for keeping the law to the greatest detail. Jesus talked about that the scribes will tithe on their mint and their cumin, and they're tithing on even the herbs that they get from their individual gardens and things like this. I mean, they tithed on everything. But we can see that in other passages, Jesus referred to the scribes and the Pharisees as whitewashed sepulchres, talking about how they're clean on the outside, a sepulcher being basically a coffin, talking about how they're clean on the outside, but on the inside, they're still just as dead as they were. And this is something that we see in this passage here, in this particular beatitude, is that blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. This is something that is happening internally. This is a change that is happening on the inside and then begins to manifest itself outwards, as opposed to religiousness, which starts on the outside and has the hopes of coming into the inside, which that doesn't ever really work. All it does is, becoming more and more religious, it has a tendency to just make us more self-righteous, more prideful, which is actually doing damage, because the more self-righteous we get, those are things that are happening internally. The more prideful we get, those are things that are happening internally. It's actually continuing to kill us on the inside, as opposed to on the outside, or rather on the inside, basically receiving the love of Christ, having that change, that new man begin to be birthed, that born again, starting to take place on the inside, and then it begins to gradually manifest itself outwards. And one of the ways that it does this is, as we're going through the passage, it begins to do this by making us poor in spirit. So we're no longer prideful and arrogant. That doesn't mean that we don't still battle with those things. We can see that in Romans 7. But we begin to mourn over our sin in verse 4. We begin to become more meek in verse 5. Begin to hunger and thirst after righteousness in verse 6, more merciful in verse 7. And these are things that are happening on the inside, and they are gradually manifesting themselves in our lives outward. So something to think about there. You guys, God bless.